The next one is from Barry. Barry says, the hipster kid should really educate himself a bit more. Mouthy money indeed. Hi everybody, my name is Edmund Greaves. I'm editor of Mouthy Money and host of the Mouthy Money podcast and channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favourite topics, which is the state pension. Actually going to be specifically talking about something that I featured in recently. So I was very fortunate to be given a slot in what's called The Big Question in the Times newspaper, which is obviously, big newspaper in the UK, to talk about state pension and actually have two counterpoint arguments, one arguing that the state pension should be means tested and the other opposing that view. I was tasked with arguing in favour of means testing the state pension. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that and my views on it. What I actually want to do today, though, is because it's such a provocative topic, the state pension. I noticed, as you do when you kind of go on these things and you expose yourself online to the masses of the internet, is you get quite a lot of opinions, sometimes quite angry opinions, come back at you. And I actually had a bit of fun looking through the comments on the Times article, and I've decided to pick out some of my favourites. Which have some sort of themes develop throughout. Some of them are kind of willfully mean, which I quite enjoy. I find quite funny, mainly because they're just sort of hopelessly wrong. But we're going to look at these together today and just see if we can learn a little bit more in kind of 10-15 minutes. See how we get on. So let's crack on. As I said, these kind of the comments that came up very much kind of form themes that I've heard before about criticisms both for and against changing the way that the state pension works. I kind of know, not shy about my views on the state pension as it exists today being really, really broken. So the first of those topics was that people argue that it's not a benefit. So let's read some comments. First one came up was from someone called David, and he says, I am fortunate in that I have a large private sector defined benefit pension. Good, that's good for you, David. Well done. I do not really need the state pension. Okay, you've proven my point so far. And theoretically would be willing to have it means tested. Okay, that's good. He says, the big problem, however, is it is not a benefit, it is a right. I have paid for it all my life through NI contributions. You cannot take away something that has been paid for and is a right. This is wrong. It's not a right. It is part of a system that is created by the government, where the government takes taxes that are paid for by workers and gives it to pensioners who have worked and accrued NI credits, contributions throughout their life. That makes it a form of benefit. It's not a right. A government could take it away. You wouldn't be able to take them to the European Court of Human Rights to get it back. The WASPy generation have learned that already. I think another commenter actually responded to David, and I'm going to articulate it quite well. And this is from A. Goddard. I do agree that if you have paid NI, you should never have it taken away. Okay. However, we need to recognize NI for what it is, a Ponzi scheme. So you haven't paid for it all your life. You've paid previous generations' payments. This is true. What I believe should happen is ASAP, split new NI contributions to cover today's contributions and to start a savings scheme so that people's contributions are retained for the future extraction. This is a really interesting idea, and I'm going to come back to it a bit later. But this is possibly one of the more measured solutions that A. Goddard is touching upon here. And that is actually, fixing it for the long term. Then we've got another comment from Caroline, where she says, the state pension is not a benefit. It seems to have been redefined as such relatively recently, particularly by entitled journalists such as this Yes writer. Caroline, I can assure you I am not entitled. I promise you I'm not going to go into the detail of that. I just think that there is a system that is broken, and by having slightly controversial discussions about it, then we might be able to fix it, because currently it's not being fixed. Now, the next big kind of disagreement is the idea that the pensioners, where I said over, who have large kind of asset wealth, shouldn't be getting kind of benefit handouts from the government. So the argument against this is that people are asset rich, not cash rich. So what does that mean? That means that they've got maybe a property that's worth £1 million, but they don't have lots of cash in the bank. JG said this along these lines. Greaves is an idiot. The fact that 50% of pensioners apparently have more than 500,000 net wealth is utterly irrelevant because unless I have missed a point, a pensioner or anyone else can't eat bricks and mortar. An utterly irrelevant point. The crucial issue regarding the triple lock is that it is a ratchet. One eventual day, if nothing changes, the state pension will overtake average earnings. What the government needs to do is work out at what point that percentage of average earnings the triple lock should be altered. I suggest to be in line with inflation only. So JG's right here in the sense that yes, the triple lock is a major problem and probably the central problem. Governments repeatedly rule it out and are too scared to do anything about it. He also said that pensions can't eat bricks and mortar. That is literally true. But in the figurative sense, people can use their property wealth that they have built up over many years through a system that has provided them with massive tax incentives to do so and tax breaks in order to accrue that asset value. They can liquidate that asset, and there are lots of ways to do that in order to become cash rich. Now, I mentioned in the article that pensioners over, £500,000 of wealth, but I didn't say that actually we should means test that level. I don't think that, because £500,000, thanks to inflation, is not that much these days. Actually, I would be more in favour of over £1 million worth of assets, particularly because that's the sort of level where we start looking at taxes on things like pensions as well anyway, and that kind of thing. So yeah, and 1 in 10 pensioners has over £1 million in asset wealth. So, there are ways to unlock that asset wealth and turn it into cash. It's something that can't be ignored. And Duncan commented on JG's comment saying, actually, not so much of an idiot, thanks Duncan, as a socialist. Okay. But to be honest, not much difference. Right. Okay. Well, I'm not going to comment on the definitions between those two things. I will say I'm not a socialist. I'm quite far from being a socialist, actually. I do think that you have to fix things that are broken, though. And then we had Paul also commenting around the asset-rich thing, saying that net worth figure is meaningless if it includes real estate. Again, M. Hall, no, it's not, because that is your wealth. And if you have to liquidate it to pay for things, that is how it works. Now, this next topic was a fun one. This is a bit more like, it came across a bit more, not necessarily typical Times reader, I'd expect. But this is from a reader called Trevor, who has something wrong. He's not happy about scroungers. So he says, no, it is all the other benefits which should be means tested. We have far too many scroungers. Now, without going into whether or not we have too many scroungers, I think there are obviously issues in the benefit system. The first problem with that viewpoint is that the state pension takes up about half of the benefits that we pay out each year in the budget. So it's rather a large target, and that makes it the problem. The other issue is that, we can't even, the government's tried basically cracking down on scroungers and has been unable to, because its own backbenchers won't even vote for measures that cut down things. So, how are we, what's the point? What's the point of even having that discussion? Trevor is so animated about scroungers that he then came back and made another comment. And he said, if the objective of the yes writer, that's me, is to reduce government spending, then address the issue of 3.7 million people, almost half of all claimants, claiming unemployment benefit are not required to look for work. Yeah, that's probably fair. It isn't really relevant to the state pension issue, though, because the state pension is a problem in and of itself. We can look at whether people are earning benefits that they shouldn't be getting, etc. That is a discussion for another day. This discussion is about whether the state pension is affordable or whether the system is going to break. And my view is it is not, and it is going to break. Now, this is my favorite because they're completely just sort of mad. Nothing to do with anything. So this is me I've already been accused of being a socialist in comments above. This first one, though, is from Alan, who says simply, does he think he's still at The Guardian? Now, Alan, if you're watching this, I would love to know who you think I am, because I've never worked at The Guardian. I don't think I would ever work at The Guardian. I think probably because they wouldn't want me, mainly because I don't have very Guardian forward views. So, okay, Alan, if you're out there, let me know who you think I am, who you're confusing me with. Very interested to know. The next one is from Barry. Barry says, the hipster kid should really educate himself a bit more. Mouthy money indeed. Wow. On a previous video, Barry, I was made fun of for having a hat for a defunct basketball team, which is true. I was told to spend less money on defunct basketball team caps and more money on my pension. I think that's probably fair. So I'll just keep wearing this one. I won't buy any others. Does that make me a hipster? Maybe. I'm not quite sure. The next one is from Stephen, who says a number of pensioners are only asset rich, not catch rich. Again, we've covered this already, so I'm not going to go back over it. But then Stephen decides to call me a lefty at the end of the comment. Again, this is wrong. I'm not a lefty. In fact, I don't believe in left and right. I think it's much more complicated than that. And you're being reductive, Stephen. Thank you. Now, I'm going to try and think a little bit about the solutions, because there were actually some readers of the Times article who were quite constructive, and I thought it was quite good. So the first one of those was someone called Mr. David Allen, who made quite a constructive comment. He said, the state pension is means tested. It's called income tax. If you worked hard to build up some other income, the state takes 40% of it back, and in some circumstances, 60% of it back. Yes, the extra tax is paid on your other income, but that is the effect. And that's okay, but let's not pretend it doesn't happen. I think David is right. The state pension is based on kind of current projections of increases in the future, is probably going to start tipping over that personal allowance level of getting taxed. The problem I have with the idea of the state pension being clawed back through the income tax system is this. People who are on very low incomes won't be able to afford to avoid having some of that income taxed away through the income tax system once that level starts getting over that personal income allowance. So those people at the bottom will start having some of their earnings, their money, which they have to live on, and they obviously are not wealthy, taken away. The very wealthy, who, again, I have no problem with people being wealthy, but when you have to recognize it within a system that helps people become wealthy, there is, an element of redistribution that generally speaking has to take place, because that is how the state works. The problem I have is that people who are in that position where they have lots of assets and maybe have an income are able to pay wealth managers, advisors, in order to minimize their tax bills. And this is the problem that we have, is that this means that the government then comes and makes millions of changes to other bits of the system through pensions, through inheritance tax, all this kind of stuff makes it endlessly complicated, means that our tax code is enormous, all because people are just avoiding paying the tax. They're getting out of paying the tax. So yes, we do notionally claw back some money through the state pension from the income tax system. But arguably, I would say it's never going to be enough, especially not when people can do things like take tax-free lump sums out of their pensions in order to offset that kind of income. Next one is from Timothy. Timothy says, compulsory enrollment and contributions at 10% is the generational fix. This problem won't get resolved overnight. It is a problem that will take 20 to 30 years to fix. Remember, Australia introduced their superannuation in the 1990s. Their benefits are only just coming now. Now, Timothy's comment was probably the one that I agree with more than any other of the whole thing. There is no quick fix for the state pension. It's going to take a long time to sort it out. I think that his suggestion about where we change the nature of the system to make it contributory, instead of having just this void that national insurance goes into at the moment, is the way to fix it. Again, as he says, it's not a quick fix. You can't fix it now. So in the near term, we need to fix the affordability. That means, changing the triple lock. But again, the government doesn't have the guts to do it. So what are you supposed to do? You have to, they're looking at increasing the state pension age, and it's just going to affect other, people down the line. Again, it goes back to that Ponzi scheme idea. This is a form of Ponzi scheme at a state level. So yeah, Timothy, thank you very much for your comment. And yeah, just to leave it off, the final comments, which I thought were short, sweet, especially salient, and I think I've mentioned it several times already through this video. One from David, who said simply, no government would contemplate this. And I think that's right. We're never going to means test the state pension. I don't know why I argue for it, because I'm, blowing into the wind here. But I like to talk about it because I think it's a good way of getting people's attention on the fact that we need to fix the state pension. It is not sustainable as it exists today, and we need to do something about it. I don't think we should take money away from poor pensioners. I think it's important to support people who are living in poverty in retirement. I think that's absolutely, necessary. But people who have £1 million house but don't have, cash to pay for their groceries, they're living on a problem that they need to fix. And, there currently aren't any incentives to do that when you can kind of just trip along on your state pensioning income and be absolutely fine. Now, the very final one, which was a reply to David's comment, was from someone called John, who said to do so would be electoral suicide. And I think that is the nub of our problem, is that we do not have a government that has the guts to take this problem on, to fix it, to do something about it. And I'm not sure if we ever will. I think really pessimistically at the moment, I think the projections are by about 2036, the entire system will basically come crumbling down. If you look at the state of government finances, if you look at 30-year gilt market and the yields that we're having to pay on that, the markets are telling us that they no longer trust the government's long-term spending plans. And that is because of the electoral suicide that is coming for them if they do things like make the state pension more affordable. That is where we are. And unless we get significant guts from somebody to do something, it's just going to get worse. Now, I have to give a little bit of a news you can use takeaway here. The last thing I'd like to say is if you are like me, you think you're not going to get state pension when you're older, you don't like the fact that you're paying into a system that is paying out to other people, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, and you think that it's not going to exist in the future, well, you need to have your own plan. You need to have your own idea of what you're going to do in retirement and how you're going to pay for it. And that means saving into your pension. That means ensuring that your pension is doing the absolute maximum that is possible for it. And to ensure, that you don't end up in a situation where you have a retirement that you are unhappy about. Now, we talk about this kind of stuff all the time on Mouthy Money, so please do give the channel a like and a subscribe for more. We're going to be talking about this plenty, and we're going to be doing lots in the future on how to ensure you can kind of get the most out of your pension and not be left with that kind of disappointment. Thank you very much. If you made it this far in the video, really appreciate it. So with that, thank you everybody, and goodbye.